Okay, let's kick off with some basic radial design. When we're doing a design, one of the things we need to understand is what our design current or our load is. So we identify that as IB, and that's the power over the voltage. That's the load current, if you will. And then with that, we then identify the rated current of the protected device, the IN. And then when we have that, we identify the minimum required cable size and its cable current carrying capacity, which is IZ. And you see that little relationship here, IB, IN, IZ, which we are familiar with in 7671. What we need to be cautious of, though, is if we just install that conductor as is, we may not consider the methods of installation and the environmental characteristics that may compromise the ability for the conductor to give off heat under load. So we need to apply those in a design, which may then adjust to a tabulated value, IT, and then we need to make sure our IZ is a cable that actually captures that excess of current or that amount of adjustment. Okay, so IB, IN, IZ, but we need to include a tabulated value. So we may have to increase IZ to account for that. We cover that later on in other videos. When we're selecting a protected device, though, we need to be cautious of the characteristics of the equipment itself. When we look at a protected device, there's different areas in its curve behavior that we need to think about. We've got to think about the instantaneous characteristics. Is the device going to operate within a rapid time for the requirements of ADS, or is maybe the actual inrush load too much that the device will trip under a nuisance trip? So we've got to look at the instantaneous characteristics, the inverse time characteristics, which is obviously just the longer duration of time, and then any actual defined intervals in between. So there are certain different sections in this curve. And what we'll do in this little video is we'll just look at how some of those are addressed. We must remember the fundamental principles at all times with 7671, though. Okay, we always need to go back to the fundamental principles of ensuring that we're achieving the requirements of safety, persons, and property. Okay, we need to be aware then that the conductors, okay, and any parts of the system intended to carry fault currents must be able to carry any of the current for the required duration of the demand and the fault. And under fault conditions, stuff can get thermally stressed. When it gets thermally stressed, it becomes a significant risk of fire. So we always must make sure we consider that. Now, with that in mind, then, when you think about things like equipment, while 7671 focuses mainly on the final installation to the accessories, typical equipment on a standard plug top has a fuse, and so overcurrent protection is then provided further in the cord set for the products. But when we use socket outlets such as 60309, the 63, the 32, the 125, or another method of isolation, if you will, the cord sets and the cables feeding that equipment may actually not have sufficient protection. So we may need to then obviously adjust the sizing of our conductors or divide the system up effectively so that we achieve sufficient protection for that connected equipment. With regards to fault currents, we often have this understanding that an overload current, as defined in 7671, an overload current is an overcurrent occurring in a circuit that hasn't got any problems with it. So it's too much plugged in, for example. There's no faults. Whilst the fault current is an overcurrent that's coming from a fault. Two clean, different definitions. So this assumption is that the fault current will be a much large amount of fault current, achieving a very, very quick time. We design systems for that under ADS in 7671. The other assumption is that an overload current will actually be a low current for a long duration. And it says that in 767, overload currents of short duration should be avoided. However, there are scenarios where maybe the fault current actually may be a low fault for a long period of time, such as high impedances on TT systems, for example, with insufficient RCDs or blinding of an RCD. We may have situations where overload current actually could be much larger and very short in duration. So we do need to make sure when we're looking at the characteristics of our equipment that we are considering these other variables. So when we think about the behavior of a current within a device, we've got three phases or three stages of current here. We have, when we turn on the equipment, a very initial point of energizing, we have the inrush of current, the amount of energy that's rushing into the equipment. Okay, this is called the inrush current. And then as the device and the equipment is starting to react, this is what's called the starting current, where it then reaches a period of operation where it then achieves what we call the running current. And you can see those three currents illustrated here. With that quite a large inrush going in, we then kind of have a period of starting, which then falls back to then a fairly stable period of running current. All of that has to happen to the left side of this red line. And this red line is what you see when you look in Appendix 3 of the 7671. That is that line. So all of that behavior has to happen on the left-hand side of that line. If, for example, the inrush current was to happen past that line, the device will just operate as a nuisance. So all that's got to happen to the left-hand side of that line. Now, something to add, these lines in 7671 are very much a template for use. In design, we must look more specifically at the manufacturer of our product device, of our protected device, to make sure that we get the data from them, the I1 and the I2, the envelope of operation. Because as you can see here, for example, this is just type C breakers in 7671. And you can see here it says, if you look at the table, that a 6 amp requires 60, so a times 10 multiplier. We'll look at a couple of slides with an example of a Hager where actually it requires less. So it's very easy, if we assume it to be times 10 all the time, for our inrush currents to actually operate devices. So this is just a template. We can use this in design courses, but if we have accurate data from manufacturers' resources, use it, okay? Because that's much better for any design that you put together. So it says in 533.2.1, the rated current, or the current setting of the protected device, must be chosen in accordance with regulation 433.1, overload protection. In certain cases, we must avoid unintentional operation where the peak current values of the loads may have to be taken into consideration. And that's this inrush. You see this inrush pushing right to the end of that line. We've got to make sure that the period of initial operation of the protected device is larger than the peak of the inrush current. As we saw a moment ago, this suggests a 6 needs 60. If we look at more accurate data, and I've got some copies here of Hager data, you can see that if you look at the top there, the C6 actually requires just 43. So if we were to achieve 50 or so, the regs would say it's okay, it won't trip, but here Hager data would trip. So we must look at the specific data from the manufacturer. This is some Hager data provided. There's copies of this in the IET design guide. The inrush peak load current should be compared with the minimum peak tripping current. As I say, when you look at a manufacturer, they may have like an envelope where they have a starting and an ending. And that's important with selectivity exercises, because with selectivity exercises, if we just work with one single line, it's very easy to keep them apart. But if actually we look at the envelopes, there's a potential that they could overlap, where the later operating time of one device actually overlaps past the starting time of the upstream device. So you've got to be very careful when you're looking at the selectivity exercise, and that's sometimes why we don't put the ratings of devices so close. We may not put, for example, a 40 and a 45, or a 40 and a 50. We may go up from a 40 to an 80, or maybe to a 63, but we'll put bigger spaces in our design, most often due to those envelopes. So inrush peak load current should be compared with the minimum peak tripping current of the circuit breaker to ensure that unwanted tripping is avoided. This current value is obtained from the manufacturer of the load equipment, so you've got to look at different manufacturers and get this data from them. And the minimum peak tripping current calculated by the multiplying IN, so the nominal rated current, by the lower multiple of the instantaneous trip, and then by this 1.414 crest factor. So this is the data for Hager. You've got the B, the C, the D for the breakers. And you'll see they don't match 7671 because they're a bit quicker. They're a bit more rapid. And then you've got different minimum tripping currents for different frames or different forms of breakers for larger rated devices. Another example where we have to look at this is where we're looking at the loads that we put on, and we think about things like the inrush of multiple pieces of equipment in a single circuit, such as lighting. So with lighting circuits, we must look at what the lowest instantaneous trip current compatible with the inrush current is going to develop, in that if we think about an inrush for an LED driver in a luminaire, 1 or 2 may be okay, but when we have maybe 6, 8, 10 switched in a single operation, that might build up to a magnitude of current that may go past that inrush curve. So this image shows the nature of the inrush current at its peak, or the Imax, and T50 is the time duration in which the inrush current pulse is equal to 50% of the Imax, showing an example of what is inrush current, a rush and then a recovery. When you switch this on, this is very typical for LED drivers. We switch them on, there's a rush of demand, and then they recover down quite quick. If we turn on many simultaneously, that's quite a large magnitude of initial demand. So, as an example of applying these, if we were to look at this table again, how many high frequency ballasts, each having maybe an expected inrush of 20 amp, would be able to supply on a 16 amp type C? So if we think about this table, we're going to have a C16, where you can see there 113 is the starting operating current for the Hager device, 113 amps. How many 20 amps can we put on that? Well, that's just 5. So we can only actually put 5 luminaires with those high frequency ballasts in one switching operation. Not necessarily per circuit, it depends really on how they're switched. If you can control the switching so they're not all switched simultaneously, then you may not need to break them down per circuit. But you've got to look at the switching operation and the actual inrush of those switching operations.